The best noise. Thank you so much. Here begins the hour.
Okay, I like this MC. Don't you?
Yes.
He's so
Sir-
enthusiastic.
Sir, you should say that a little louder.
Okay, I like this MC. Please pay him well.
Thank you.
But he is so enthusiastic, and congratulations to Namita, Bachi, everybody. I think every volunteer who keep making this festival better and better. And one of the most proud things Mumbai has right now in just what 3 years? It's been 2 years, 3 years. Yeah, and it's really incredible. And thank you all for coming, especially on a day when election results are coming, like as if it's the World Cup final or something. But to come here, it's really special. And for me, I can't tell you how special it is for me. And it sounds cliched, but it is very nervous. You are 79. I'm 39. When you were my age, I was probably conceived or something like that. So it's a little scary. But it's great because I've done work with Ruskin before. We have the same publisher. And also I recently spent several days with him interviewing kids for scholarships, 12-year-old kids. And they were smarter than us, most of them.
Very much.
And I have to tell you, there was video conferences done from all over India. And the kids would see Mr. Bond and they would go crazy. They would just they would tell me, "You're sitting with Mr. Bond." And it was like, it's still in this generation also, there's such a craze for you, and it's unbelievable. So I told him, I think I'm interviewing you for the Lifetime Achievement Award. And he said, I think they should just call it the Rocking Chair Award. Because they're giving me that award and saying, here's the rocking chair, now stop. But I said, no, I don't think that is the case. Times is just giving you for that. And he very kindly agreed to talk about things he normally doesn't talk about. As if you go on YouTube and try to research on you, sir, there are so few interviews. And I think you don't like giving interviews.
No, I'd give them from time to time if the interviewer is a special person.
I mean, see, the charm is there, It's and he also agreed to talk about things he normally would never talk about. So it's going to be a very scintillating conversation. And if I ask something, please don't scold me. Just we can go to the next question. But let me first, I'm going to go through your journey. This is an incredible life. Forget an incredible writer. It's an incredible life. He was born in India in 1934. And because he writes so much about childhood, I want to ask you, sir, about your own childhood. Because that has obviously had an impact that you write so many children's stories. And I just noticed that era. You were born in India and you saw the independence. And I was just talking to you.
Yes.
Do you remember, so you were 13 when India became independent. Also at the same time, in your personal life, you had a separation of your parents. You are of Anglo-Indian ethnicity in India. So you were like a little different child from others. Can you please talk about that? Talk about your childhood and these 3-4 incidents, how you saw them. It's a Bombay thing. We do that.
Well, I should start by telling you, thanking Brookbond Taj Mahal for their generous gift. And I should tell you why Brooke Shields didn't want to marry me. She didn't want to be called Brooke Bond. But to go back to my childhood days, yes, it just struck me that there aren't many people around now who were alive and growing in the years before independence. 1947, you're right, I was 13 years old. And I had, those earlier years, I had grown up in an India in which I had perhaps been in a way a little protected and hadn't mixed a great deal with Indian boys. But all that changed that year. I was in school in Simla. I was a school prefect. And it was in fact my job to raise the Indian flag on the field. So I think I'm one of the few people alive today who actually raised the Indian flag on Independence Day, 1947.
Isn't that cool? So what, but you're saying you didn't mix at that time much with the local Indian kids. So at you're clearly Indian now, but at that time, what, did you have a concept of nationality? Did you not? What did you think when India became independent? Was it a good moment for you? What did you feel like?
I was so young that it didn't cause any conflict of interest in me, because I just simply grew up. Actually, the country didn't change dramatically. Certainly, there were, 1947 stood out in my memory because there was a lot of communal violence at the time because of the partition and the creation of Pakistan. So in my school in particular, where I think about 1/3 of our students had come from Lahore and other cities in West Punjab, they had to be evacuated, and there was violence, and there was a few people even died. But it's a year, and then the following year, 1948, I was sitting in a cinema hall in Dehradun and watching a film. I used to just go on my own. For one thing, I was never bothered or troubled in any way, even during the Quit India movement and in the years when there was a lot of disturbance. But 1948, January, I was sitting in the cinema hall, and they suddenly stopped the film, and the manager came out and said, "We're sorry to inform you, Mahatma Gandhi has just been shot." And so these historic moments they come unexpectedly out of the blue. And so a lot of things were happening around one. But life continues, and my home life was at that time also a little, since I had lost my father and I was with a stepfather and my mother. So it was a lonely childhood, but one that has always stayed with me. And I think we remember our childhoods vividly in some way. My childhood memories are often more vivid than those of periods later in life. And I think that's why I've been able to write fairly well about children. I've been able to identify with their loneliness, their problems, their difficulties. And so it goes.
So you talk about lonely childhood, and you were earlier telling me that it drew you to books, which drew you to writing. So you're saying that, how did that shape you as a writer, and why was it so lonely? Because other kids,
Yes, I think a lot of writers have had lonely childhoods, and it probably it does help them in a way to maybe be more sensitive. And I have to say, though, when I started writing and wrote my first book, and at the age of 17, you take yourself very seriously. So I was really writing for adults or for the general reader or for myself. And it was only, I think, when I was in my 40s that I occasionally started writing stories and books meant specifically for young readers or for children. And so now I do both. Sometimes I write for children, sometimes for myself. And since it's been a very long, as you say, a career in writing, that you sometimes get a bit fed up, so you have to keep changing, sometimes from fiction to non-fiction to poetry to essays, and that helps you to in a way keep going. And like Chetan, I know he's a very disciplined writer, and I've always been one too. I think that's how you survive in a way as a writer.
Yeah, but you are far more disciplined. You live in the mountains. I live in Bandra. I'm in traffic jams, so it's very hard to be. But actually, it's very interesting. Many people don't know this, that his children's writing came only in his 40s. But when he started, which was very early, so he finished school, he went to England, and that's where your first book, Room on the Roof, came out. Was you writing in the 50s And I think it was very well received. You had some very good reviews.
Good reviews. It didn't
And
sell
it-
very well. It's selling
Okay.
better now, in fact, than it did then.
But then it must have been a really good book, right? Because it's so, and it had, and no, I mean, I saw some of the old, I was researching and you're being modest, but they did say that a fresh voice has arrived and things like that. At that time, you were in the UK not seen as an Indian writer, is it? Or you were seen
No, I wasn't even seen as a writer because
Okay.
I was no, I just written my first novel and I was looking for a publisher. So at that time I was seen as well. I was working in a small travel agency which had been set up in the island of Jersey by Thomas Cook. And it was very small. They'd sent out a lady representative to look after this travel agency. And she hired me, and I was very inexperienced and incompetent. And this lady, who was in her 30s, she fell in love with a gentleman who used to sell fire extinguishers. And they were having this torrid romance, since the theme of this festival is love and romance, I'll mention it. She was having this torrid romance with a fire extinguisher. Sorry, with a man who sold...
That can be pretty
with a
torrid.
man, with a man who
Can be very
sold,
torrid. I
who
can
sold
imagine.
fire
He's stressed,
extinguishers. And she left me in charge of the office. And I used to get these calls from London asking me to book people into rooms or hotels. And people were very fussy. Somebody wanted a room with a double bed. Somebody wanted a room with twin beds. And I was always confused. Even today I get mixed up between twin beds and double beds. So that people who'd been sleeping together all their lives in one bed, I was putting them in separate beds. And husbands and wives who didn't want to sleep together, who wanted separate beds, they were being put in the same bed. And finally I got fired. So my 3 months with Thomas Cook ended in disaster. So I did various jobs like this while I was writing this book at night. I used to come home at night and write this novel. And after a year, it was based on a journal I'd kept in my last year in India. So it was written out of a longing for India and for lost friends. And when it was finished, it took me a couple of years to find a publisher, and I had to rewrite it and to go through 2 or 3 drafts. And then they gave me an advance of £50. That was the standard advance in those days. But £50 was enough to come back to India. In fact, in £40, you could come by ship. So when I landed here in
How
Mumbai,
long did the ship take? Sorry.
about 3 weeks.
Okay.
3 weeks. So when I landed here in Bombay, I still had £10 with me. This got me back to Dehradun, and I started freelancing, and that was it.
Wow. So, you're talking of longing, you're talking of loneliness, theme of the festival is love. Your name is Bond. I know Brooke Shields didn't work out, but what about Mr. Bond's love life? Nobody really knows.
I don't know myself sometimes.
So what happened? I mean, surely there were something. Were there crushes? What was it?
Yeah, there was this, I did, in my 20s, I wrote a lot of very romantic stories. The Night Train at Deoli and others, and people often ask me if they were true, and some of them were, and some were wishful thinking. And so the romantic period came and went. And I think by the time I was 40 or 50, in that essay that was so beautifully read out, in fact, I no longer have it. I must ask Bachi to give me a copy. And maybe I write one now, Life Begins at 80.
But were you ever deeply in love with anyone?
I was often in love. I would fall in love with any pretty girl I met, actually.
That is quite a common thing. And then, what did it happen that she
but
also?
they did not necessarily reciprocate.
I can see you're being diplomatic, and I'm pushing the limits here.
I was a jilted lover.
Only because it was the theme. So you said you actually, I mean, you get £50 advance. You are a new writer in England. You had a job, even if you're not doing it to the best of your ability or whatever. And you decide to spend 80% of the money to get a one-way ship ride to India. I mean, that must have been some motivation to come back to India. I mean, and I can't imagine India, I mean, I'm sure it was far more, London is far more developed. You really didn't know what you'll do in India. What
No,
was
I was-
this, what was
I
this
was-
big urge?
You know, people were going abroad to Britain and America to become writers. I came back to India in order to become a writer. I did it in reverse, actually.
Wow. And it didn't matter to you that India is no longer a British colony and
Oh, no, that was immaterial, really.
yeah. And then you came back and you worked in journalism for a while.
Yes.
And then you chose Mussoorie. Of course, you grew up in that part of India. But you've really been there for like 40 years now. And
Yes, when I came back, I lived and worked in Delhi for a few years. But I felt that I think life would be better if I would be happier living in the mountains. And I don't know if it doesn't necessarily help your writing. I think if you're a good writer, you can write anywhere in Bandra, in a railway train, in any part of the country. But so simply from the point of personal happiness, and I wanted to live in the hills, and it did help. And I have all these years been relatively happy there, and contented. Contentment is the word, I think. After all, happiness is very elusive. But so here I am still. It's helped me to survive in a way.
what is it about the hills? I mean, I stay in Pali Hill, which is not really a hill. But really, you've